To the curious, the seekers, and also to the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych podcast. Recently, there have been some interesting occurrences regarding and surrounding the Trump administration, and today we are going to take a brief look at the interesting interview between Sean Hannity and Donald Trump a few days ago. With me today, as usual, are Ken, our MBTI specialist. Hello and welcome, Ken.
Hi, Cindy.
And Don, our Enneagram specialist. Hello, Don.
Hi to both of you.
Beginning our program today, I think that Don may have just a brief description of the potential significance for both the Trump administration and our nation.
We're going to discuss some of President Trump's recent remarks in an interview with Sean Hannity and what is being implied there and some of the psychology that our president is employing. So I think it should be an interesting discussion.
We'll play a clip showing what might be coming.
Well, first of all, I was very impressed that the New York Times did that, because that was the first good glimpse that maybe mainstream is going to pick up the greatest political scandal in the history of our country. Again, bigger than Watergate, because it means so much. This was a coup. This wasn't stealing information from an office in the Watergate apartments. This was an attempted coup. And it's inconceivable, like a third world country, and inconceivable. And I have to say that I think a lot of information is coming out, and it's coming out fast, much faster than anybody would have thought. And there are a lot of people very nervous about things that are going on. And I will say that IG, the Inspector General Horowitz, he, other than his conclusion where he said no bias, but he meant that in a different way than you would think, he gave a great report last time. And I really hope that he's going to give I don't know him. He was appointed by Obama. That bothers me a little bit. But I think everything I can see, he's really an honorable guy. And I think he knows how big this is. And if he is as honorable as he's supposed to be, the IG report coming out in 3 or 4 weeks, from what I hear, is going to be and should be and almost has to be a blockbuster. I said, let anybody speak. The White House counsel can go speak. Everybody. I heard, this is incredible, but I heard they interviewed 500 people. I didn't know we had that many people between the White House and other branches. Who would think? They interviewed 500 people, if that is possible to be correct. They spent, as I told you, $35 million. They had unlimited human resources. They had the FBI working for them. They had U.S. attorneys. They had the Justice Department working for them, and they found no collusion. But I was totally transparent. I didn't tell anybody you can't go in, and I could have. I could have said you're not going to testify. Nobody is going to testify. When I say it, they do what I say. I could have said that, but what happened, Sean, is I wanted to be totally transparent. So then we get no collusion, no obstruction. And then the House starts. Now we're going to go, and we're going to go further. And I said, we've had it. That's enough.
And I think President Trump knew he was innocent all along, and that might have made him appear and actually have acted with great restraint, knowing that this was not true. And it's one way to look at the whole situation. And I think hindsight will probably see it that way as well. And definitely there were things where actually the intuition overcame the sense data in psychological terms. But unfortunately, that's part of the justice process itself. Is if there's a preconception that President Donald Trump is a criminal, they will falsify the evidence. It's happened with gangsters and other people where they'll catch them on any technicality just to hold them. And if they're convinced that this person is guilty, beyond a shadow of a doubt, but then it hits the court and then everything comes out at that point and the defense attorneys take care of it. But this is a typical hard edge of U.S. law enforcement, and it happens across all range of cases, and it's not a pretty sight. And this is essentially what these they're higher level versions of, but they're basically prosecutors on one side, and with a chief executive trying to carry out foreign policy. It must be an immense burden to have to deal with this internalized, politically charged prosecutorial orientation.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of that is the big part of that tending to believe that your side is right is associated with whatever ethical system underlies the political group that you're a part of. And we have these, the President Trump and the American left or Democratic Party really squaring off on so many fronts that it's really hard not to see the polarization. We do need to trust our institutions, but when our institutions have been compromised through falsifying of evidence and skewing of public opinion through the media outlets, we really realize how much rebuilding we've got to do.
I think we are seeing some interesting developments, though, on the far left. I point to Jimmy Dore as one of my. He's very interesting. Has a somewhat different take on many issues than many people on the right would have, but there is some agreement there that they're just as upset about this investigation as the far or the more conservative or right side of the scale. And it's almost as if those two sides could probably have a fairly civil conversation about many things, and that hopefully is kind of where the political process is going. But there is definitely a vested interest in keeping everything just the way it is, and anything that moves into that frame that is perceived as a threat will face the wrath of the existing power structure.
I could see people on the left, maybe not yet, but as a little bit of time passes, and perhaps it is happening already, I could see people on the left feeling quite betrayed because they actually have been misled. And as time goes by, they may realize that more and more, that the people people like Rachel Maddow and some others were so heavily invested in the Mueller report, and had their people that follow them become emotionally invested in the Mueller report. And that was a complete, it was a miscalculation, and whatever they expected to be there evidently wasn't there. And maybe the people who were promoting the Mueller report were expecting that something else would happen in the meantime, that maybe they had some fallback position that didn't come together in time. But whatever the case, I can see these people who really invested themselves and their hopes in the Mueller report just finally realizing that they were not told the truth and that they were misled, and they may jump ship.
Well, and I think the only logical response was made, and being forced into a corner with the victory of President Trump, to take the case as an espionage case instead of a domestic. There's just no other way you could do this. So if you move it offshore and invent this Russian conspiracy, all of a sudden you can call into play the intelligence services and the and a whole range of other laws pertaining to international relations. And I think that was really the heart of Russiagate, was this move to offshore the influence, taking it away from the court system here and almost moving it off into the paramilitary court system. International, it becomes an international issue, and that's why Don's point is very well taken, with the interaction that also came through Great Britain, England, which technically is also influence from a foreign power. So I guess we'll have to see there might be some action there. I mean, it seems plausible that if there was undue influence exercised through even an ally, I think exercising influence on our domestic election would I don't know the legality of that, but it seems like it could be tested.
One of the things I want to point out here, relating to what you've already said, Ken, is that with regard to future presidents and the possibility of the presidency becoming weaker or stronger, depending on how this plays out. I think it's really worth observing that if President Trump did not have the steely resolve that he's had through this, belief in his own innocence, as you've said, that he might not have stuck around if there was the possibility that he could be wrong, or that this was not a game that he was willing to play because the stakes were too high. He would have, potentially bowed out. And with particular reference to the president's Enneagram type, which is a 3, the achiever, the one who is really probably more than any other type really keys in on the feelings of those around him. He had been made to feel very, very unwelcome by the mainstream media for a long period of time. And that is no small achievement, that he was able to, as a 3, stand against the mainstream media. I can't help but feel that he's been preparing for this for a long time and really knew that this was coming and was not really surprised. And we'll see it as it all plays out. But this really looks like a fight that between these two factions of American society and the world that's been that this fight has been squaring up for a long period of time. I believe it's being handled really well in terms of not splitting society any more than it has to, and hoping to win over people to unify and to not continue the animosity. But nevertheless, it is strong, this tension that we have between this polarity between Republicans and Democrats, or just in terms of the political parties, but it cuts across the spectrum. And again, this is just a really difficult situation for a 3 to navigate, because they play to the crowd. They want the acceptance. They want to lead a broad movement. I'm sure that President Trump gets his personal energy renewed when he goes to rallies, and that's essential not only in politics but to rebuild his own inner sense of his value.
One of the things that Don mentioned, and I thought it was interesting, and it recalled a opinion that was proffered by someone, and I can't remember who. Hopefully they pipe up at some point and restate it. And maybe you've heard this before, but we all think back to that 2016, the last week. It was almost like a goal line stand, and we had the Access Hollywood tape released, and then the emails at about the same time. And those two elements almost competed for each other in mudslinging. It was a huge mudslinging battle at that point. Yet through all that, Hillary was still expected to win. And the theory that I'm proposing is based on that perception, which is a little harder to relate to right now. But at that time, most people were convinced that President Trump would not win the election, or candidate Trump at that time. So the last incident that occurred that influenced the election was Comey's exoneration of Hillary Clinton, yet it was a backhanded exoneration. And it never really made sense. So I'm just going to offer this theory, and I'll kick it around the room and see what you think about it. But the way the thinking goes is that that backhanded comment that he made, that, well, she's still guilty, but we're not going to charge her, was an effort by the power structure in Washington to let President Hillary Clinton know, future President Clinton, that they're still in charge, that they still have the control file, and we're still kind of running the show, and we have significance in protecting our turf. And that's the understanding that that Comey wanted to convey, is that sort of silent hand of power that was acceding to the chief executive, but still having a little bit of having some leverage. And that was maybe, in this theory, one of the reasons that Hillary was the more popular candidate. They had a better control file. They had a better handle on her personally, and just in dealing with her, than President Trump coming in from the outside.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, Ken. I think that's exactly spot on. I think that is what Comey was trying to sell. He was basically saying our institutions are too big to fail. We can't have our FBI investigating one of us. And of course, he couldn't say it that blatantly, but that is in effect what was being said. The establishment versus the establishment is a place that we don't want to go. Ultimately, I think a lot of American people saw through that and had been aware of some have been aware of the corruption within our institutions for a long period of time, and felt that it needed to be faced. So at one level, probably a subconscious level for many, this was what the election was about, was do we get to the bottom of where our government has gotten rotten? And I think Americans did, at least in the Rust Belt and places that had seen better days in the past. There was still enough memory of what could be that they thought, well, this is worth cleaning out. This is worth fighting for.
I'm just surprised. I've been surprised for a long time. I remember being on the freeway driving in another state, hearing about the meeting on the runway between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch. And at that time, when that happened, I thought, okay, we're going to see dramatic changes right now. And that never happened. And so many what seemed like landmark exposés, information coming out that I would have anticipated would make a huge splash and pretty much require that our whole republic needed an overhaul. And it didn't happen. And at some point, I think that, if we don't see equal justice, and I think really that's the point here. Hillary Clinton had the email servers that were clearly unlawful, illegal, and there were many other activities that really were not on the up and up. And then we have a man, Trump. I mean, love Hillary, hate her, love Trump, hate him. We're not seeing equal justice. These two are not being treated equally under the law. Trump is being examined under a microscope, and Hillary has been exonerated, more or less. I mean, and Comey did not state, you're right, he didn't state that there wasn't any wrongdoing. He simply stated that the wrongdoing was not going to be prosecuted. And unless someone can give a real solid explanation of why there is this inequity, something, I think there need to be consequences to somebody. This needs to be addressed on some level.
Well, to me, it goes back, and for the people that have studied some of the deeper history of the United States of America, there's an echo happening here, and that is of the attempted coup against FDR that was warned of by Smedley Butler before Congress. And at that time, there was the decision within the power structure that the American people couldn't know about this because it would be too upsetting. And that, of course, was before the days of modern communication. All we had was radio. And even that was in its relative infancy. So what we're at today is, I think, a revisiting of those days in which the American people now, as a body on the world stage, have matured enough to be able to handle some very disturbing things about the power structure within our government. And it's, I think it's being handled pretty wisely. It's not being handled wisely by the media, but I think by the power that is behind President Trump. And I don't believe that's the establishment. I believe President Trump is actually doing what he said, going there to clean the swamp, but the swamp is very resistant. And the American people at large are on his side, except those that are not fully aware of what's going on. But I do believe that will be revealed.
Yeah, and I think then we look at what happened to Comey with the firing. He, at that point, had shot himself in both feet, and he had both sides kind of ganging up. I think Rod Rosenstein even recommended Comey's firing. So I don't know what the consensus is here either as to, did that tip the election? Did Comey essentially, based on just bad strategy, put President Trump over the top with that? Because that, as far as I remember, that was the last influence on the election besides the Access Hollywood tape and the emails. That was only about 2 or 3 days right before the election.
Right. I think he intended to absolve Hillary, but it was basically saying we don't want too much turmoil. And remember Comey's book that he came out after that vindication or so-called of Hillary. He came out with a book called A Higher Loyalty, and I believe that what he's spelling in that book is that his viewpoint that there's something more important than the strict adherence to the Constitution. And as he saw it, I believe he saw himself as a part of the power structure that was trans-constitutional. They wouldn't say they're against it, but they're just saying, I think we can transcend it. And of course, ultimately, I don't believe that that's true. I believe that it was an extremely wise and powerful document, and that people that oppose it are self-deceived. But I think Comey is a key pivotal player, definitely.
And so with that, to the curious, the seekers, and also to the experts, we thank you for joining us for this edition of Poli-Psych Podcast. Please click like if you have indeed liked this program. We hope that you will consider subscribing to our channel, sharing our videos with your friends, and returning to join us in the near future. Until then, take care.